My background for standing up and talking to you today, I'm an ergonomist. I've ventured also to the dark side. I'm also a chartered safety practitioner. And in terms of MSDs, I act as what's called an expert witness. I act for defendants, for claimants, and also as a court-appointed expert. So some of this is going to be about what I've learned from my experience of writing reports and going to talk to people. And some of it is about what we do for organisations who I think get it more right than not. And really, what I'm trying to get today across, the idea I'm trying to get across today is something like, what does good look like? If you've got to manage MSDs, what are you shooting for? And over the next sort of hour, I'm just going to go through some of the challenges that are out there, look at some of the tools, look at some of the approaches, and also look at what happens when things go wrong. So, to begin at the beginning, I'm going to talk about the MSD debate. I'm going to give you a bit of history. I've been kicking around this area for a few years now. I'm also going to talk about, you know, how does claims work? How do claims work? How do you manage criminal and civil claims? Look at how MSDs integrate into wider risk concerns, and then try to give you right at the end a template for maybe what good looks like. How big a problem is it? This is 2010-2011 data, and I think if you talk to the HSE, musculoskeletal disorders are one of the big success stories. The number of cases are falling. The general trend is that people are getting better, organisations are getting better, not only at managing them, but spotting them early intervention. And essentially, this is all driven by targets that the Health and Safety Executive were given in 2000. And when we had a Deputy Prime Minister called John Prescott, he basically began an initiative, or put his name to an initiative, which was about driving health and safety in the UK. And there were targets for improvement, and there were some around MSDs, because at the time they were seen as the big kind of occupational health issue of our generation. What you'll notice is there's some interesting things that come out of the HSE stats. First of all, when we talk about musculoskeletal disorders, we're not talking about one part of the body. My colleague talks about when you get a problem, it's interesting to the lump of material that sits at the other end of a computer, that kind of organic material that sits at the end of a computer. It's anything to do with backs, with arms, with necks, with shoulders, with wrists. And you see here there's a pretty much a split between backs and between arms, basically. What we do see is the highest rates in older workers, and this is of concern because, as you know, the workforce in general is ageing, and if we're seeing higher rates in over 45s as the workforce ages, as it appears to be doing over the next 10 years, we might see a slight upturn again. But by and large, we are at the tail end of a whole set of things that started, I guess it started probably for most of us here. Whilst we recognise a whole set of conditions like tendinitis, tenosynovitis, a set of conditions of musicians were particularly prone to certain musculoskeletal disorders, it wasn't until 1983 that really the world sat up and took note. Essentially, in 1983 there was what they called an epidemic of RSI in Australia. In fact, it was so prevalent that organisations, solicitors at the time, would take out adverts in local papers saying, if you work for this organisation, you've got RSI, contact us and we'll get you money. And in Australia it became known as retrospective supplementary income. If you were out a few pence, you wanted to get a few dollars, you basically said you had RSI, and the courts gave you an award. It led to a knee-jerk response, particularly in the European Union. At the time, in 1989, the European Union was looking at putting in a series of directives around safety. And one of those directives was on the safe use of work equipment. And contained within that directive was a small paragraph on something called display screen equipment. And because of what was happening in Australia and what was starting to happen in the UK, the European Union decided to extract out this one paragraph on working with display screen equipment and to create a whole new directive which became the minimum requirements for working with display screen equipment, or the display screen equipment regulations. And supporting that, in 1990, the Health and Safety Executive produced this thing called Work-Related Upper Limb Disorders, ROLDS, and they were trying to take the heat out of RSI, which as a topic was highly controversial and indeed massively disputed. There were lots of court cases revolving around whether RSI existed or whether it didn't. And pretty much where we've got to is the notion that now we understand that there are some things about work and some things about our hobbies and about our activities which basically can expose us to these whole basket of conditions which we call musculoskeletal disorders. There are some challenges around these conditions. The first of which is, it's assumed that when people get hurt, it's because of work. And it's almost like there's an assumption that if you go to the doctor and present yourself, and if you say, I've got a pain in my wrist here, the doctor says, oh, you've got tendinitis, it's caused by using a keyboard, without actually exploring, what you do and what else you do. There's also a real tendency for people to do things at home that maybe give them pain, but not to realise that pain until they start work. And work-relatedness is something of an issue, working out actually what the causal factors are. We also find that almost all of the data that you see, even the HSE stats, is entirely self-reported. So how do we know how many people have MSDs? Basically, because those are the people who tell us they've got MSDs. And they also draw statistics from things like self-reported work and also from some of the TUC studies on whether their colleagues have got MSDs or not. So there is kind of a bit of a debate about the accuracy or otherwise of the data. We've got some costs, and one of the things that this doesn't say, which is quite a scary cost, is it talks about the average days of 15 days lost. There is massive variance there, massive variance. And also, not only do we see an average of 15 days lost, we also see time between episodes as being fairly consistent at somewhere between 4 and 5 years. Particularly around backs. If you have a back problem, 15 days is pretty good. 15 days is pretty good. But it's actually not just the fact you've got a problem. It seems likely that one of the biggest indicators of whether you will have a back problem is whether you've had a back problem before. And what we know is that there's a huge tendency for people to have MSDs to basically to get better, whatever that means, and then in the future, typically 4 to 5 years away, people trip into injury again. And what that means for the worker is that if you're 35 and you have your first episode, and you have another 30 years working life, you're likely to have 6 episodes, and it's likely to cost 90 plus days. So there's a big idea here that says early intervention, effective treatment is massively cost effective. And again, if you look at the cost of sickness absence, we're talking in terms of hundreds of pounds per year, and this data is 2010 data, but what we also see is the bigger you are, the bigger the costs. And there's very rarely a link between what it costs to make somebody ill and to rehabilitate them and what it costs to prevent it. Companies are just bad at it. They don't do the joined up thinking. Very few organisations actually know what sickness absence is costing them. Very few of them even know whether they get any benefit from doing health and safety. I'm engaged in a large research project now which is looking at the literature, the scientific literature, to try and find out what the benefits are of doing health and safety. And there's virtually nothing out there. Massive amount of research out there, and there is no overall view. You'll see everything from it's psychosomatic, in other words, there's no real causation. It's not a physical thing. A lot of psychosocial studies are going on to say it's a combination of various factors. It's what people think, it's about what people feel, apart from what they do. There's also a huge debate over what you've got. If you want to know what sort of MSD you've got, it very much depends upon who you present yourself to. If you go and see some types of GPs or some types of surgeon, you'll be diagnosed one way. If you go and see somebody else, you'll be diagnosed another. And to illustrate this, there is a particular type of tendinitis called the Quervain syndrome. And the Quervain syndrome, I'd never heard of. I will admit, I'd never heard of it. And then about 10 years ago, the Lancet did a big article on the Quervain syndrome. It's to do with this tendon here. It was quite rare. And the Lancet did a big article about this particular diagnosis of the Quervain syndrome. And within the next 2 years, I saw about 30 or 40 people who had it. And what was clear is the GPs read the Lancet and they suddenly go, oh yeah, I know whatever that is, we'll call it the Quervain syndrome. We saw the same over tenosynovitis. Suddenly it became the illness, the MSD of choice. And we still see a lot of people who are taken in for carpal tunnel release operations for carpal tunnel syndrome. And the interesting thing about CTS is it appears that a carpal tunnel operation where basically you release the pressure in the carpal tunnel can be effective, but basically the challenge then is if you don't know what the root cause is, what caused the person to become ill, to have that inflammation, to have that pressure on the median nerve, if you don't know what they did to get that condition, it's not obvious that you know what you're doing to stop it coming back again. So even after you've had the operation, you might just give more room for swelling, you might just give more opportunity for the condition to come back. So where are we in terms of most organisations? First of all, we don't talk about the debate, have you got this, have you got that? There's a much more pragmatic view, and that includes the HSE. You'll see a slide, I mean the HSE now recognise that it is not, MSDs are not a condition that will ever be eliminated. So it's much more about managing it, and it's much more about not necessarily worrying about what the diagnosis is, but it's worrying about what the intervention is. So I don't care what it is that is giving you pain in your wrist. I don't care whether it's tendinitis, tenosynovitis, the Quervain syndrome. I don't care whether you've got crepitans. I don't care what you've got. What I want to know is, how can I make you better? How can I fix you? And how can it stop it happening again? So a lot of the emphasis now is on pragmatic intervention. What can we do? And part of that undoubtedly is about playing with people's minds, because there is absolutely a psychosocial element to all of this, and part of it is actually making clear to people that we're listening to them, that we're being sympathetic, that we have a view. And one of the really big challenges, particularly with MSDs, where it's to do with backs, is that we have a massive problem of creating cripples. I have a friend, he did his PhD in pain, around back pain, and he said one of the problems is that, you know, it became a legitimate condition, and because of various reasons, the time between treatment is quite high. If you have a back problem, if you go to your GP, the chance of getting actually somebody who can deal with that back problem and somebody who will intervene and somebody who understands what might cause it is pretty slim. And the longer you go without proper intervention, potentially the worse it gets, to the point where you might become functionally disabled. But what's interesting is if you look at other cultures, you don't see that route. You don't see that functional disability. And certainly across the UK as a whole, there does appear to be this toleration for people going, you know what, you've got a bad back, that's it, you're written off. And we sometimes perceive that work, fitness to work, is a binary state. You either have it or you don't. But the reality is, actually, fitness to work is anything but a binary state. There's a full spectrum of things about your fitness to work. And the art of managing MSDs is deciding what people are able to do. And generally, people are a lot better at being at work rehabilitating than anything else. You know, if you talk to some organisations, you know, famously, DuPont, basically no matter what's wrong with you, they get you into work. And their approach is because, you know what, you're a lot safer at work than you are anywhere else. But we do appear to have this massive problem, and this almost certainly is down to these psychosocial factors. You know what, it's okay to be ill, it's okay to have a back problem, it's okay not to do anything. And we still have a belief that, you know, the best way to treat a back is to lie down, when we know the exact opposite is true. If you want to exacerbate a back problem, lie down a lot. So, what can we do in terms of prevention? it is about managing risk. It is about managing risk. And as many of you will know, risk has been the big idea for the last 20 years. Really started from health and safety, but it's now gone into everything. So we had in health and safety, we had the so-called six-pack in 92, in force in the UK, 1st January 1993. In the UK, we also had things like the Turnbull Report. We had the management of risk programme within government. And what we see is that actually quite often health and safety legitimately should be a matter for concern at a corporate governance level. If you're making your staff ill, I think if you're attesting to good corporate governance, you ought to know what it's costing you. Because it seems to me that if you're really going to sign a statement of internal controls to say, do you know what, I know what I'm doing, you should at least know what the cost is. And you should know whether that's tolerable. I was fortunate enough to work for a major supermarket, and it wasn't to do with MSDs, it was to do with accidents. They wanted to know why people came to their supermarket to fall over. And the challenge was that in a normal year, the first 4 weeks' profit from the supermarket were just paid out in personal injury claims. And they wanted to know what was going on, and what was going on was that basically people saw them as a soft target. And that became a corporate governance issue because of the costs. I asked them what their MSD strategies were, and they just commissioned the Health and Safety Laboratory to do a big study to find out what was going on. And I said, based on what? Because it was costing you too much. And the answer was, no, based upon we didn't know. We didn't know what it was costing us. We didn't have sickness absence data which we could interrogate to find out what it was costing us. And it seems to me that organisations quite often, when you ask them, what is it costing you now, don't really have an answer. And I think that makes it very hard, because if you're going to intervene, how do you know whether you're any good? What's your benchmark? How do you know what it's costing you? And if you don't answer that question, you have no idea how you actually can demonstrate a bang for your buck. So I think that's a really good challenge for all of us, is to work out what MSDs are costing us right now and what then we can do about it.